Hi everyone. Today we'll be doing one thing and one thing only, which is responding to Montematers why anti-trans is anti-woman. And basically I woke up with a little time on my hands in between projects, and this seemed like something that was in my wheelhouse that I could respond to. I've already watched it once, so basically what we'll be doing is watching it again. Before we start, a couple things to note. One, this video is unscripted. However, I have seen the video previously, but we'll be going through it bit by bit and responding to it bit by bit. Before we do, a little bit of information about Monte and myself. Monte, their channel reads The Girl Who Bothered to Read the Bible, Deconstruction, Accurate History, Political Review, Stay Eternally Conscious. There's someone who's been around for a while, since 2012. And from what I understand or know about them, their videos were recommended to me maybe a couple of months ago now, but they seem to be someone who has ties to Christian fundamentalism initially, and they moved away from that. That's my understanding. They're white, cis-het woman, basically, but they're also questioning of various things, which is basically what this video is about, and they're certainly inclusive by including trans people in the larger struggle that all women face against oppression. So that's sort of the gist that I got. Basically, they're an ally and they seem like a good one. In regards to me, I am a male to female trans woman. Gothic ancom, they, them, she, her, poly, demi, pan, 39, anti-fash, multi-volume book author and illustrator, sex worker, indie researcher, PhD in Gothic poetics and Ludo-Gothic BDSM, who specializes partly in Metroidvania, erotic artist, pornographic historian, and invigilator, loves Amazons. Disclaimer, all opinions are my own, i.e. as part of my research conducted alongside my book series, Gothic Communism. The material within is written, speaks about public figures in popular media for purposes of education, satire, transformation, critique, and hence falls under fair use regarding copyright and free speech regarding defamation. With all of that being said, let's get started. This video is actually, also, before we get started real quick here, this video was made 5 months ago. It says, no description has been added to this video, so they're just letting the title of the video speak for itself. Why anti-trans is anti-woman. So this was made March 18th, 2025. This would have been several months into Trump's presidency. And I thought, okay, this literally popped up in my feed today, so seeing it, I thought I would respond to it. So let's get down to it.
So I got this comment on a video that I did about the bill that almost passed in the Senate that would have allowed for the physical genital inspection of teen female athletes.
Alright, I'm not familiar with this tweet, so I guess we may as well, we should look at it. Of course, genital inspections are idiotic. How about we simply let women have women's spaces? This comment, I'm not sure who Violet Fire is. We simply let women have women's spaces. So the way I approach it is that there are going to be some things that come up in this video as we proceed, but basically segregation is a bad idea. So if we just let women have women's spaces, or we divide people up into, these different areas where they can govern themselves within a larger hierarchy, sort of like an ice cube tray, that leads to a lot of problems, because then those spaces will be divvied up the way that, like, a prison space is divvied up. And then you have, okay, well, white people go here, women go here. What are women? What are men? And there is basically a hierarchy of preferential mistreatment. That's what I call it. Often through imbricating persecution language. So you have different ideas of how to punish people, how to divide people, and then those are executed not just by the state officially, but also by de facto agents through stochastic terrorism, tokenism, that kind of thing. And women having women's spaces, this is something that this person, Monte Mader, is going to talk about as well. Oftentimes, classically, what happens is women having women's spaces that are seen as belonging to women will be handed over in terms of command to particular kinds of women, specifically white, straight European women. And I think that's what this, how about we simply let women have women's spaces? This person doesn't define what a woman is. It's a very broad comment. You might be familiar with the idea of the question more recently from Matt Walsh's What is a Woman? They say adult, biological, human, female. But in reality, a woman is whatever you want it to be. And that might seem inadequate, but it's literally something you could identify as. It can be identified as according to gender, according to social aspects, according to sexual orientation, performance as identity. All of these things can go into the equation, but through Judith Butler, to us, gender trouble is where people cannot look beyond biological essentialism, where they can't look beyond the connection of gender and sex, whereas someone like myself, for instance, would be, look, gender and sex are not intrinsically linked, and they are not linked intrinsically to biology. And my definition of woman would be something that takes that into consideration. A woman is pretty much anything, whereas this kind of statement, let women have women's spaces, the implication is that it's a particular kind of woman.
And how anti-trans laws are really anti-women laws because it's about policing the expression of gender, which dramatically impacts women. Now, please don't harass this person. I went to her profile. I think that this comment was made in good faith. And
I do want to weigh in, though, that oftentimes the policing of women and the policing of a particular hierarchy by state powers mid-crisis leads to a situation where you have certain people who will tokenize by virtue of having more privilege. People betray as a matter of privilege and convenience, and desperation and oppression. So basically, the more privilege you have, the more likely you are to betray out of convenience. Whereas if you're more oppressed, you will betray and tokenize out of desperation. So just something to keep in mind when push comes to shove and the state wants profit to occur, as it always does. Cops, robbers, pimps, whores, that kind of thing, that dichotomy of us versus them and the way that it plays out in various forms. These questions will then be asked, oh, well, women are under attack. It is far easier to blame an individual or a smaller marginalized group than it is to punch up at the system. And this is something to keep in mind as Montemayor makes their points.
I'm going to point out the issues with it, but I think that it leads us to a really important and valuable conversation that we can have about this. And the first thing I want to point out, especially as a female athlete, is that women's sports have never been women's controlled spaces.
Yeah, even if you go back to, antiquity and you had, say, the Spartan women of yore, where these women historically had more rights than their Athenian counterparts. They were afforded those rights by the state. The state, from city-states to nation-states that they exist under a more modern concept, is something that is historically controlled by men. And sports, as a sign of privilege that has military origins, i.e. the Spartans, or the Athenians for that matter, would police those according to various gender values that were unto themselves an extension of the state. The idea that men and women, even in the ancient idea of what those were according to those states, had a patriarchal character to them, even if the gender binary that we think of in a modern sense, tied to capital, didn't strictly exist yet, and people weren't strictly speaking straight. There was a dichotomy of sorts, one that favored men first and foremost. Ancient Athenian men, ancient Spartan men would dictate what women could and couldn't do. And Spartan women, for instance, could be more athletic and could train nude in public compared to their ancient Athenian counterparts, the latter of which would be policed according to Amazon propaganda, Amazonamachia. Amazons were things that Athenian women weren't supposed to be doing, largely a proxy or something, an analog of Spartan women, which were the enemies of the Athenian women. No, don't act like those Spartan women or you'll get conquered, that kind of thing. All of those ancient ways of debating what is or isn't okay arbitrarily would have been dictated by and large by men patriarchally. And that same patriarchal sort of circumstance is something that exists in the present space and time. In the early 1900s, you would have women who were basically told that you can't compete in sports. That's something that men do, even though that idea of an ancient imaginary antiquity from like Eugene Sandow, the Olympics, the idea that this is the domain of men, like everything else apparently, women are relegated to spaces of sexual, reproductive, labor, and women's work more broadly, which is to the household. They're not allowed to do anything else. The dictating of what women can and cannot do is something that also dates back to antiquity, but goes forward into the present through an ontological antiquity. There were certain hallowed ideas, and you can't challenge those, be it of the church, of the state, of corporations selling these ideas to you, the murdering of these things per fascism and corporatism vis-a-vis Mussolini, and the false revolution of fascism as described by Michael Parenti. So these are all things that Montemayor is absolutely correct, are historically controlled by men. But also, I would add, vis-a-vis Mark Green and the Man Box, controlled by women acting like men, gatekeepers, TERFs, fascist feminism.
Because historically, coaches, scouts, athletic directors, team doctors, the guy who decides how much airtime the WNBA gets have all been men.
It is important to note, though, tokenism is something where you do have female coaches, even if they ultimately answer to men. Women do play a role in their own assimilation, their own tokenizing, their own subjugation. So that is something worth noting. You can't just say, well, it's all men, because obviously women play a role in their own policing. And that tends to have a racialized character. That tends to have a transphobic character. If you have white women that are punching out against women of color, you might have straight women more broadly, regardless of their skin color, punching down against gender nonconforming minorities or indigenous minorities or non-Christian minorities.
All of the positions of power within women's sports have been men historically, which is why we get news headlines when there's a female head coach.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. It's always treated as some kind of like exception. Wow, look at how special they are. It's Ellen Ripley syndrome, where people look at this virgin whore style and they'll look at someone who's like, oh, someone who exists where they shouldn't exist. They must be some kind of anomaly. They must be some kind of space alien. They're from the gods, that kind of thing.
Hired for a job. So understand that women's sports is a male-dominated space. The athletes are there, but the positions of power are still by and large not held by women.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's true. Anytime you do have a woman in a position of power, it's gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. They don't exist there to let other women into the fold. They exist there to gatekeep, keep other women out, but also other minorities, people who are seen as not women, including trans people. And not just trans people, I would also like to say that, gender non-conforming people more broadly, you could have enbies or non-binary people, you could have intersex people, you could have ace people, just anyone who doesn't conform to the heteronormative standard more broadly, which is dichotomized between men and women in a straight way. This is attached to settler colonial ways of thinking and also Cartesian ways of thinking. Women are of nature, men are of reason, of the state, of science, of the Enlightenment. So all these things go into the same melting pot.
The second thing is, there's no way to get around that this comment is transphobic.
Yes, and there are different degrees of transphobia. The idea that someone is transphobic or not transphobic versus different degrees on the spectrum is an important thing to acknowledge.
I don't think it was meant that way, but it is. Because what the implication is here is that trans women are not real women. And that's where we get the...
Yes, the idea that trans women are not real women is something that, people like myself face all the time. We're often accused of being manning women's spaces is a very common way of framing it. Before I mentioned imbricating persecution networks, you have the language of goblins, the language of vampires, the language of werewolves, so sodomy, blood libel, and witchcraft. Specifically, and then Orientalism for, people of color as well, and various phobias along that line of thinking that are presented in xenophobic ways through a enemy within. It can be pushed out into the foreign spheres of capital. Capital is a frontier enterprise, but when imperialism comes home to roost, comes home to empire, which it does under fascism, these things, that's what we're seeing right now with Christian nationalism. America is a settler colony, always has been. It's an ethno-state. It's a Christian ethno-state. It's a white nationalist Christian ethno-state that was built on the sovereignty of that specific in-group versus everyone else. The land simply belonged to them a priori, and they went in and they took it ipso facto, and various other places emulated that particular state model. The Germans, for instance, in World War II with Hitler's Germany, the Third Reich.
The opportunity to have this conversation of what makes a woman.
Yeah, and I think, again, we talked about Matt Walsh, we talked about, a woman is something that I would define it as something very broad, because the broader it is, the more inclusive it is, the more diversity there is, the more potential to include people through a pedagogy of the oppressed, because we have more in common with each other than we do the ruling class. That's important. We can have solidarity. The moment you start to gatekeep things, it's not that we don't have definitions, but we don't operate in such a way where we start to gatekeep people, because that leads to the types of conversations that I had about asking the trans question, very similar to asking the Palestinian question or the Jewish question. What to do with this homeless child? This person who doesn't belong, the state always needs some scapegoat. The state always needs a victim to abuse. And these kinds of questions are put forth by the state, but also state proponents in ways that police others, that have workers dividing and policing themselves.
Now, it is completely reasonable in our current climate for women to be afraid of losing our rights, losing more autonomy, losing our freedoms, losing our access, losing our equality.
Also, it's important to mention that older forms of feminism were fascist. So first wave and second wave feminism, basically from the late 1800s onwards, women were afforded property rights. At the same time, for instance, in 1870, homosexuality was recognized through Carl Westphal, I believe. Could be getting the name wrong, but Carl Westphal basically acknowledged that women were, or men, homosexual men in particular, were an actual medical thing. Like it was something that was recognized as a medical term, homosexuality. And from that point forward, as Foucault explains in A History of Sexuality, homosexual men existed from a juridical standpoint. They could be treated and subject to juridical review, to medical documents, to court documents, so on and so forth. It was something, it wasn't just sodomy accusations, which were very broad. It was an ancient to medieval term. The same time that was happening, women were being afforded rights. But those women, first and foremost, were white European women. And again, yes, like gatekeep girl boss. So the women who are afraid of losing their rights and also who have trauma in their own lives are made to triangulate, to punch down girl boss style against other people, women or not. It's not just trans women, but also trans men, for instance, and anyone else who's oppressed. They will become cops. So this kind of tokenism is something that is made. You mentioned the person that you're responding to made her as approaching this in good faith. Well, there are plenty of women, e.g. J.K. Rowling and her ilk, who approach this in bad faith. And first wave and second wave feminists classically are bad faith actors. And it's only until you get into inclusive gender studies or gender inclusive feminism, intersectional feminism, that you start to see people losing that gatekeeper mentality. That is always going to be something that's under attack, under siege by tokenized forces, by women. Women will police themselves. They have to, through the state, because the state can't, there's just not enough men to go around, and there's the paradox. If women are pushed into their own spaces where only women can exist, even though men can go in there whenever they want, the idea that's argued is, oh, this is a space for women, and they expect women to police themselves, because in reality, they have to in order for the state to function. The state has to have workers dividing and conquering themselves, because there's just not enough official police agents to do it. If the cops are going in there and very nakedly policing these oppressed groups, women or otherwise, then it would become more obvious. But if these groups do it themselves, then it becomes something that is seen as normal, but also something you can scapegoat. When things, on one hand, J.K. Rowling can police women, she can be seen, one, as this empowered girl boss, but also as this hyena, basically. And men and the state more broadly can, on one hand, raise them up, but also lower them by saying, oh, well, she's rabid, she's crazy, but also she has power. You know, there's this virgin whore kind of thing going on, this pimp prostitute kind of thing going on, this cop victim kind of thing going on.
We are not protected in the Constitution.
Yes, absolutely. The Constitution gives rights to white European men. All men are created equal, and there is nothing in there that gives equal rights to women or indigenous groups or people of color or non-Christians. So that's 100% true. And I told my ex when I was living in Florida with them and they were abusing me, I would try and, convince them of certain things from my point of view, such as if Joe Biden wanted to make these oppressed groups more equal, they would enshrine it in the Constitution through some kind of amendment, like a new Bill of Rights for the 21st century. My ex did not like that idea, mainly because that would require Joe Biden to actually, in good faith, try and make other people more equal instead of making them unequal so the state can police them as usual.
We do not have equal protections in this country, and our rights vary state to state. So it is completely reasonable to have that fear, but trans women are not the threat.
Preach. I mean, the reality is that the most dangerous people, aside from white straight men, or just, the cis idea of a man, is ourselves. Basically, or cis women historically are known to punch down against queer people, regardless of their sex, regardless of their gender. But right now, trans women in particular are policed in a very particular way compared to trans men. Trans men are often viewed as confused. They are seen as, oh, well, we can unconfuse you, it's conversion therapy, and take you back, whereas trans men are often seen as men in dresses, they have knives, they're rapacious, Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, and the only thing that can happen with them is they have to be euthanized, generally speaking. They are a vampire that has to be staked, they're a werewolf that has to be shot with a silver bullet, they're a ghost that has to be exorcised, so on and so forth.
And again, this comment forces us to have the discussion of what makes a woman. Now, right-wing and conservative and fundamentalist groups will say, well, a woman gives birth. But
no, I mean, the state is going to view it like that. But women, again, are, like from Judith Butler onwards, not defined by their biology. And the moment you do that, you run into something called gender trouble, where this entire binary starts to fall apart when you realize how dogmatic it is, how prescriptive it is. If women aren't defined by their bodies, by their biology, by literally everything that the state is built around. The state needs women. It's not Mars needs cheerleaders. It's the state needs women to give birth for them, which it compels because childbirth is a dangerous enterprise. And they don't want to do it in ways that actually give women rights. They want to make money. So they try and force women into having birth, giving birth, having children, by taking away their rights and putting them into positions where they have no choice, and then they can exploit them for their labor because women's work is historically unpaid, be it women in the household, be it working girls, prostitutes, sex workers more broadly are historically unpaid. That's because of the profit motive tied to the state model out of antiquity into the present space and time.
We know that that's not it. We're more than our physical body. We know lots of women who can't give birth, or women who are past menopause who can no longer give.
Specifically cis women you're referring to right now.
birth, they're not less women because of that. That's not the defining standard. Or your period, same thing. Postmenopausal women are not less women because they don't experience that.
Oftentimes, just within tokenizing spheres, they will see themselves as inadequate. Or even if they're not tokenized, if you've been told your entire life that what you are is by virtue of a specific function, a specific bodily function, and your body can't uphold that, it is common to feel inadequate. I was told my entire life that I had to be a man, for instance, and if I didn't live up to that standard, I would feel inadequate. I was also told that my penis was a source of violence against women, so trans women in particular tend to have very complicated feelings about their genitals. Our genitals are a threat, and we have to try and find ways to subvert that. So, yeah, absolutely. If people are born into these positions where the gaslighting that occurs, the dogma, the prescription, Aristotle said, give me a boy until he's 7, I will show you the man. Same idea with women, where they're raised in this specific space. No one's immune to propaganda, especially if you're raised from childbirth into adulthood. You're going to inherit various confusions, guilt, shame, because the state relies on those things to keep workers in line by policing themselves, by feeling guilty, by feeling like they've done something wrong because they don't adhere to the state model, which is inherently impossible to live up to. The perfect woman doesn't exist. The perfect man doesn't exist. But the idea of those things does exist and can be used to make people feel inadequate, which historically works quite well.
So is our body part of it? Sure. Is the way that we express our gender part of it? Of course. But I would say by far the greatest determinant of what makes a woman, what makes us part of this community of women, is our shared experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the shared experience, like a pedagogy of the oppressed, but also a pedagogy where some people have relative privilege, some people have relative oppression. It's different degrees and flavors of oppression. We have more in common with each other than we do with the ruling class. But it doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge that, some people have it better. And that's just a fact. If you are a white cis-het woman, you are going to have relative privilege compared to a woman of color, a cis woman of color, or a person of color who's trans, or even a white trans woman such as myself. There are different degrees of privilege and oppression. I have male privilege ostensibly, right? But also, one thing that happens with trans women is you have trans emasculation. Whereas if you have a trans man, for instance, they still have baby-making parts, which are seen as more valuable than sperm-producing parts. And as far as that goes, they're seen as they can be salvaged a particular way, whereas trans emasculation is often seen as once you exit the closet and you show yourself to be trans, it is impossible for you to go back because you've exposed yourself as not manly in a way that is ultimately far more expendable. And I'm not saying this to try and say, oh, well, we have it worse than trans men, because trans men are subject to all the abuses that female violence experiences through workers, or is experienced by workers through the state. So again, it's just different degrees and flavors. But it is worth noting that a lot of the villains of horror, you do have the Medusa or the Gorgon or the Amazon, the Siren, the Banshee, the Oracle, the Witch, Hag horror, Virgin Whore syndrome, that kind of thing. And classically, prostitution in the West is classified as female, even though that's not the broader sort of nature of prostitution around the world, is that it also has a male or intersex character to it as well. All of these things exist in popular media, like monsters and stuff like that. There is certainly, the beheading of the Gorgon, the burning of the witch, that kind of thing. But then also you have the killing of the man in a woman's dress, the outing of the homosexual man, and that kind of violence is kind of unique to male queer people. It's not that there is an overlap. It's not that we're being punished by similar groups, but also incidentally, women to defend themselves from men, cis women defending themselves from cis men, and the heteronormative standard punching down against them, they'll punch down against other marginalized groups, including trans women. That's absolutely a thing. And a lot of the people who police trans women are often cis women more broadly. The Radcliffean heroine, the Gothic heroine, the detective, the virginal detective exploring the Gothic castle, finding the imposter within, that translates very neatly, especially in the 20th century onwards, with a white, cis, female detective getting to the bottom of things, demasking the queer person, Psycho, Alfred Hitchcock, that kind of thing, is something to be mindful of. So it's again, I don't mean to belabor these points, but my specialty, the focus of my research is specifically tokenism. And it is important to acknowledge that, this person that Mater is responding to, they're like, oh, it's good faith, we have to have this kind of question. But they're talking about like women more broadly as having a shared experience. But they're kind of coming at it from an ally's perspective. And I'm like, okay, well, being a trans woman, I can say with 100% certainty, a lot of the people who have attacked me historically have not been cis-het men. That's not to say that they don't do it, because they absolutely do. A great number of them do. They are the enemy, historically, in my eyes. They are people to hide from, first and foremost. I might be able to find an ally or two among them, but man-box thinking, per Mark Green, is a huge problem. But that specific model of thinking is something that pertains to women. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. I'm a sex worker, I'm an activist, and I'm often criticized and scrutinized most heavily by women, by sex workers. I have various experiences. I was abused by my partner, who was AFAB. They were gender fluid, so they identified in different ways, but female for all intents and purposes. They punched down against me. I identified as a femboy at the time, but they treated me a very particular way, someone to subjugate. I had no rights. They had total control over my life. By extension, the same kind of policing is something that I've experienced through female sex workers. Female sex workers monopolize victimhood, they monopolize oppression, and you can't have trans people coming along and having the erasure of women through these false women. That's how historically people like me are treated, regardless of our skin color, but that only adds to it. If I were, say, a person of color, I would have further oppression on top of the oppression that I already experienced. I have relative privilege, you might think, but again, trans emasculation doesn't even let me enjoy that, because my genitals are seen as a threat. My genitals aren't the good white knight cis-het male genitals, the lance that basically wards off evil. It's not apotropaic. Rather, I'm seen as false. So the things that would normally be of privilege for me stop being things of privilege, and they're used against me. It becomes just another way to punch down against me. Some aspect of my body is unnatural and is used to justify the witch hunt that occurs against me, and that witch hunt is classically, vis-a-vis Silvia Federici, conducted by women against each other. I'm going to try and not talk quite as much for the rest of this, or talk a little bit less, just to keep things moving. But the things that we've discussed so far are just things I want you to keep in mind.
We all remember growing up. We remember that first time as a child or a preteen where we were sexualized by a grown man.
Yeah, and again, I wish that Mater would be like, okay, we straight women, or we white straight women, all remember, because again, they're kind of speaking about this in terms of we, and saying we all remember, and it's like, well, actually, no, I don't remember that at all, because I was in the closet at the time. And if the way that they remember it as a white cis woman wouldn't be the way that a cis women of color would remember it. So it's very important to define your terms. Even if you're trying to reach out and have intersectional solidarity or tactical unity, you have to acknowledge that we doesn't really exist because the state won't allow it to exist. And women more broadly can remember being oppressed, but there is going to be variation because white women are going to be oppressed differently than women of color. Women of color are going to be treated as sexually aggressive. They are basically single mothers through the stereotype, but also welfare queens, various things like that. There's the racist arguments will weave into the fabric of oppression, whereas, we all remember being sexualized by a grown man. That's going to occur differently if you're white or if you're black or if you're Christian or if you're Muslim, for instance, or if you're indigenous or if you're trans.
Or the catcalls, or the grooming, or the your uncle's coming over, you better not wear shorts.
She's describing very specifically a white, straight woman's point of view, first and foremost. And it's important to acknowledge that, but she just leads off with we, and she doesn't say who's she referring to. You know, she needs to define what a woman is, too. And what I mean by that is she needs to define, okay, well, what kind of woman are you talking about?
Remember what it's like to be sexually harassed in and outside of the workplace, still do in many cases.
But you also have to keep in mind there are plenty of women that don't present as feminine, for instance. So these experiences aren't equal. My ex, the one in Florida that I mentioned, was someone who looked manly, who looked masculine, who had a very wide, squarish kind of body and rectangular kind of body. They were very broad, and they were treated differently. They were sexualized by men. Yes, absolutely. And they would tell me those kinds of stories. But there was also them being treated like a tomboy and bridling the Amazon versus, you know, having the bride who looks very feminine in that traditional kind of way, what they might call pretty privilege. It's not actually privilege. It's just a different way to oppress women. But it's something to acknowledge that our experiences, despite the fact that there might be an overarching umbrella of oppression, women within that Venn diagram circle are still going to be divided further by how masculine or feminine they look, even if they're cis. You see that right now, where cis women are being accosted by proprietors of restaurants or wait staff of a restaurant going into a bathroom because they see a woman who looks a little too masculine, according to them, and it turns out that woman is cis. So that's a further kind of thing that we need to acknowledge, that Monte Mader is someone who presents in a very feminine kind of way. They come from a Christian fundamentalist background. Their experiences are not going to be identical to the way that my ex was treated. My ex was someone who, as far as I remember, did not come from a Christian fundamentalist background. They came from a poor white trash background, and they were abused primarily by other women, and they desired to be like a man, to be strong. So again, the experiences, there's often going to be overlap because women more broadly are going to be sexualized, but the way that they're sexualized is going to be different.
We know what it's like to walk into a room and immediately be discredited because we're a woman. We know what it's like to have to work twice as hard to get to the promotion and still sometimes get passed over by a dude that doesn't have the same credentials and experience you do.
And specifically, you're talking about positions outside of women's work. Because you might have a woman walk into a room and she might be seen as like wifey material, put a ring on it, that kind of thing. So it's important to acknowledge how women are being discredited. They're being discredited by virtue of them trying to apply for positions that are historically denied to them. Even if you have women in history, the woman who helped code the lander for the Apollo moon landing, and she's standing next to the pile of the stack of papers, the data, the programming needed to program that lander. That was done, by a woman. At least part of it was. She was part of a larger team. So there are women in history who are granted access to these kinds of spaces, classically white women, middle-class women. So it's important to acknowledge those degrees of privilege as well. It's not like it's just this universal thing where oppression is equal across the board. It's really not.
We know what it's like to get paid less, to have the doctor dismiss our pain because women are hysterical.
Yes, but some women are hysterical differently. If you have a woman of color, she's the xenomorph, she's the alien queen. Whereas Ellen Ripley in Aliens, she's the Amazon. But they're both hysterical in that story, but they're historical per a settler colonial model that historically, at least from the cop robbers dichotomy, favors the white woman to be the police agent in a tokenized way. So these are important things to consider too. It's not like I understand what you're doing, and it's important to acknowledge, yes, we all suffer oppression, but we all suffer oppression differently as women. Like, we all don't look like you, for instance, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but you have a very femme-presenting, conventionally attractive appearance. Like, you look like Lara Croft from Tomb Raider or something. Like, you're hot, you're a smoke show, that kind of thing. And what I mean by that is, so I'm a pornographer. I work with a lot of sex workers. I work with a lot of women. I work with a lot of non-binary people. I just work. Anyone can do sex work. Sex work is work. Anyone can do sex work. This includes disabled people who, historically, if they can do any kind of work at all, sex work is often the one form of work that they can do, if any. Obviously, it depends on how disabled someone is. But you look like the kind of person who fits those conventional beauty standards that women are held to. You are the way that you're going to be treated compared to someone who isn't conventionally attractive, someone who is more androgynous looking, more masculine, is going to be different. And that's important to acknowledge.
We all know what it's like to help someone out of we all know someone who's experienced domestic violence. Some of us have had to leave it ourselves. Some of us have helped get someone out.
Yeah, I'm a survivor of rape. I'm a survivor of abuse. In my case, it was someone who had total financial control over my life. I had to do everything for them, or I felt like I did. They made me feel like they did. And again, there's this idea that domestic abuse is something that's often defined strictly through physical violence, but it's also, there's an emotional side to it. There's a physical side where you don't have agency. Sometimes someone doesn't have to lift a finger. They just have to suggest, well, if you don't do what I say, I'll throw you out. And I'll throw you out in the middle of a pandemic. I'll send you back to a place where you don't want to go. And so coercion takes many different forms.
Some of us have lost friends to it. We all know what it's like to know that the world isn't built for us.
Well, again, though, women come from positions where the dogma might actually stick, and you could say, oh, certain people, we all know what it's like. But the reality, epistemologically speaking, in terms of knowledge and existing through that phenomenologically through our experiences, they're not cut and dry. And you're going to have some people who just lead a charmed life, who they all know what it's like. Some people don't, including women. It's like, to say that women have this identical shared experience across the board just isn't true. I can understand an appeal for that and say, look, surely you know someone. I have met women who don't know other abuse victims or who have not been abused themselves. And even if the odds are far higher that they would, some people live a sheltered, charmed life, or they certainly turn a blind eye to it. Again, tokenism. It's important to acknowledge that even if they do, sometimes they turn a blind eye. Women in Nazi Germany, Hitler's girlfriend, or Himmler's wife. It's important to remember. Or was it Goebbels? I can't remember. Anyways, women under fascism, despite the fact that they're subject to these forces, sometimes they can be privileged or protected from said forces by the powers that be. Prison guards looking after certain women if those women betray their own. So this is something to consider. R.E. Silvia Federici. Basically, tokenizing forces will divide and conquer their own, destroying any sense of goodwill amongst themselves and their ilk.
That we're treated as some niche subgroup of the species instead of half of it.
Well, and also, again, you're talking about cis women. I'm a woman, but I belong to the other half of that, biologically speaking. So I really wish that she would define her terms a little bit more, just in terms of how she's using them. Who's we?
We all know what that's like.
Well, everyone's going to know what it's like differently. Even if you're subject to the same forces, not everyone's going to be aware of them. Not everyone's going to be treated the same way. That's how gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss works. Some people are treated differently. people are treated or valued differently based on their appearance, as I'm sure you were treated a very particular way. I think I've seen some of your videos before where you talk about being like daddy's good girl, being a soldier for Christendom, for the Bible, and then you woke up one day and realized that it was full of shit. But you were treated a particular way because you looked a particular way. Virgin whore syndrome puts the Madonna on a pedestal.
We all know that experience. We know the experience of unbelievable and impossible standards of our body and performance, that we're supposed to be perfectly fit and perfect like skin all the time. And we got to work full time, but the house has to stay clean.
But again, we all know what that's like. The house has to stay clean. Women of color are not going to be seen as marriageable through a fascist model. They'll be seen as degenerate. So to say that we all know what that's like, again, you're largely talking about white straight women. So you're assuming that we all know what that's like. I understand where you're coming from, but the reality is that plenty of women, cis or not, white or not, are going to be treated differently according to the larger rubric of oppression. As a trans woman, I'm going to be seen as desirable to a very particular type of chaser, but I would never be someone who's put into a household. And again, I know that you're addressing a specific type of woman, but even, with cis women, women of color are going to be treated quite differently than white women. They would be seen as, at best, exotic, at worst, an invader, someone who's unwelcome in ways that white women are not. White women are going to be subjugated differently, and they'll be basically treated as like precious protected property, but also expected to police that venue of property. The Karen syndrome, basically, it's managerial.
We gotta do everything for the kids. We gotta cook. We gotta do, but you can't have a breakdown. You need to smile more.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, housewives in the 1950s were expected to smile more. The Stepford wife, and they'd be behind like various drugs just to keep them from going, out of control, basically. So absolutely, you're like, what the experiences that you're speaking to, I understand, but you don't want to really put them off onto other groups because, a Native American woman on a reservation is not going to have the same experiences that you do as a middle-class white woman in America. That's just not true.
We all know what that experience looks like.
I would again, if I wish that you were very clear about who you were talking to, and I'm sorry that I keep berating that, but it's like we all. Again, you're not talking to everyone. You're talking to a specific type of woman, someone who looks like you, someone who comes from your area of experience. And even just white cishet women, they don't all look and sound like you. They might be atheists, they might be masculine, they might be from different class backgrounds. So you don't want to try and homogenize or treat things like a monolith. I think that's kind of a mistake.
And we've all seen women create life in and outside of the womb. We've seen women lift up communities and
cishet women
overcome obstacles in the last 50 years where women were given a semblance of financial equality. We have skyrocketed.
Yeah, but also you have to bear in mind that some of that stems from the fact that they were punching down. Like, you can't just say, oh, well, we were given this, and it was just something that was begot from good. It was also something that was begot through, we give you these rights as long as you police the territories that we allow you to police. And that's something to keep in mind. It's not just, universal rights, states' rights versus worker rights. Obviously, I'm for universal liberation. I'm against state models. I just want to clarify that. That being said, we have to keep in mind that women have skyrocketed. I feel like you're predominantly talking about white straight women first and foremost, and those women got to positions where they were by at least partly through tokenism. It's like Eleanor Roosevelt or Nancy Reagan, the throat goat herself. Like, obviously, that these are presidents' wives. It's a very particular type of woman, but the Stepford wife, Era 11, and various scream queens from 1960s, 70s, 80s horror women have escaped oppression, specifically white straight women as scream queens. Jamie Lee Curtis and various other actresses from the period. Linda Hamilton sort of starts her character arc in as Sarah Connor in the Terminator franchise, being a Scream Queen sort of character and then becoming an Amazon later on, that there's still a tokenized element to that. There's still an element of privilege that needs to be acknowledged. And just because women have done well, J.K. Rowling is a billionaire, but she did that through exploiting people. So women are still able to exploit. And it's not just like, well, if you give women rights, you have to bear in mind the context for which they were given them was under tokenizing circumstances. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because part of the reason we're having this conversation and people are just asking questions is not just men. It's not just patriarchal forces being biologically male. There are plenty of women who have sold out. And that skyrocketing, look how well they're doing. Some of that is blood money. Some of that is from them punching down. And that's just the sad reality of it.
We have taken over higher education. We have continued to climb the ladder. That's part of what this patriarchal extinction burst is about, is because women are surpassing men.
It's not just that simple, though. Like, again, it's not just the patriarchy, and it's not just women versus men, because, again, I'm sorry, but not all women look like you. I'm a woman, and I look nothing like you. And my experiences are radically different than yours. And it's not just the patriarchy, because women belong to the patriarchy too, and they uphold it. The Amazon is the classic assimilator, and it was patriarchal dogma from ancient Athens into the present space and time. Ellen Ripley is a second wave feminist symbol of empowerment to a Vietnam revenge fantasy that segued into endless shooter clones in video games, but also in movies. So again, you can't just say, oh, well, women are surpassing men. I'm sorry, but that's not true, because women, their rights are being stripped away in the same breath, and they also strip the rights away of other people. You have women in positions of power who throw other people under the bus, not just white women, Kamala Harris, but also, again, someone like J.K. Rowling in the entertainment industry, and various actresses who might seem like they could speak out against people abusing others. Even token examples in the trans community, someone like Hunter Schafer or Natalie Wynn on YouTube, or PhilosophyTube, Abigail Thorne. So women are, the idea that women are just surpassing men and it's just as simple as giving them rights. Yeah, we should absolutely have our rights, but there's a struggle insofar as getting the rights is concerned, and that struggle isn't just punching up against patriarchy as in Morton Joe from Fury Road. I got news for you. The Imperator Furiosa wasn't just this benign character. Like, she served the arm of the state. That's something a lot of people forget when they watch that film, is that she worked for Morton Joe. She was a cop, and she decides to turncoat at the end, but the reality is that plenty of people in that position don't.
We're outperforming them because we got a shot. That's all.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like I'm disagreeing with you, insofar as give them a shot, but bear in mind, they have to be given a shot in such a way that doesn't say give them a shot within the imperial core. Oh, well, I gave you a shot to be Ellen Ripley from Aliens, like, where you get to hold a gun and you get to kill Reds too. When you say give them a shot, that's pick me argumentation. And we have to do better than that. We have to be like, no, we have to fight the state. The state will give people a shot, women a shot, so they can punch down against other people. It's not just as simple as, well, just give them jobs, because the jobs are oftentimes as official or de facto police agents.
All we needed. And I gotta really shout out, because white women know what it's like to have to work twice as hard to get the promotion. Black women have to work about 4 times as hard.
Sure. But again, these positions or these promotions, these positions are oftentimes like in government, in education, in places where they have to tokenize to get those positions. When you describe working hard, oftentimes it's not just that they worked harder, but also that they compromised their principles to become women in Congress, for instance. they sold their soul for a position within an institution that punches down. That's also something to acknowledge.
And they outpace everyone in higher education right now.
Well, in higher education right now is being stripped for parts. Like, entire departments at universities are being shuttered, and all of these things that have existed for however long are just being stripped away, and higher education is something that is becoming extinct under fascism, and all the rights that women gained, just give us a chance, under liberalism, are going to be taken away as it decays, because liberalism and fascism go hand in hand. So we have to think past just give them a job within a liberal institution, because liberal institutions historically decay into fascism, where women are nothing but baby makers for the state, but also police women, de facto police women, stochastic terrorists for the state. Even if they're not members of the SS, they would still be expected to be Valkyries for the new Valhalla. So that's something very important to recognize.
So imagine, we know what these experiences look like as a woman.
Yeah, and essentially what you're arguing for here is a pedagogy of the oppressed, where we come from oppression and privilege differently, and we have to relate to other people who experience oppression differently than we do. Similarity amid difference. But that's something I feel like I should point out, Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. I was with someone, for instance, who taught me what it meant to be raped, and we were watching a film, Ninja Scroll, where the ninja girl is raped by the enemy. And I had not been penetratively raped the way that my partner at the time had. And this was after I left Florida. This was someone else, because I'm poly. But they showed me, and I listened to their point of view about them being raped. And by listening to their point of view, I realized that I had been raped slightly differently. I hadn't been held down and forced against my will, but I learned that by listening to their point of view as being different than mine. It wasn't exactly the same. And by listening to theirs and then comparing theirs to mine, I was able to realize the common ground that we had, despite the fact that we were coming at it from incredibly different starting points.
It's like to exist in this world. Now imagine being born a biological male, especially a white biological male, and the world is built for you.
Okay, sure, me.
Right? Everything from the sidewalks to how public transit is built, safety in cars, medicine, it is built for you.
Yep, absolutely.
You just gotta show up. You get paid more with the same credentials, more than your black coworkers or your female coworkers.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Now imagine being born with that. And you not only choose to risk your family, your community, your church, your physical safety, to go through this grueling physical and emotional process of permanently changing yourself.
Yeah, like the idea, well, again, choice is a complicated thing, because a lot of these feelings I had, I'm neurodivergent, so I didn't really, I was born different, and to show you what I mean, like, I have an identical twin who's cis-het, looks just like me, but he's straight. And we didn't choose to be different. We're mirror imaged too. So like, he's right-handed, I'm left-handed, and I'm trans, he's not. One's hair curls in one direction, one's hair curls in the other. So we're very much, it's almost like opposite of each other, despite the fact that we look and sound very similar. Our voices sound very similar. Our physical appearance is very similar. Not strictly speaking identical, even though that's what we're called, just because there are some slight differences. My voice is slightly deeper than his. His head's like thinner than mine. Just little things like that. He has a mole on his butt, that kind of thing. And I didn't shoot. No one told me this. I just kind of woke up one day. I woke up, and ever since I could remember anything at all, I was always gender nonconforming to varying degrees. I didn't always have the language for it. That's not something I acquired until I was in my 30s. I did have some language for gender nonconformity and fantasy on popular media, but it wasn't academic. I didn't have access to academic language about what it meant to be gender nonconforming until, again, I was in my 30s. I started dating people. There was a gender fluid person as an undergrad who I dated. I dated someone who was non-binary in grad school. I dated someone after that who was gender fluid in Florida. After Florida, I dated someone, the person who taught me about healing from rape by finding common ground, despite the fact that people are abused differently under the same model thereof. That person was a trans man or trans masc. They were non-binary, so they were a trans masc non-binary person, but they were born female. My current partners, there's a trans man, there's a femboy, trans man, another trans man. So I'm dating 3 trans men basically, and then a intersex person who is masc presenting, but they identify or they perform in different ways, but often they have a femme side as well. So, these kinds of things are not, we don't choose them insofar as they're who we are, because there's a nature versus nurture component. So the nature side of it was not chosen, but it is something where we do have to make a informed decision. Are we going to step out of the closet or not? And that's definitely true. People of color don't get to choose the color of their skin, but queer people, even if we don't choose whether or not we're queer inside, from the nature standpoint, we can choose to come out of the closet or not. And people talk about like that, oh, well, you have it better then. I'm like, have you ever been in the closet? It's awful. And people of color, this isn't me rape ranking or anything, but when they come together through solidarity, it's something that other people can see. And that includes the oppressor, but also the oppressed. And they're like, they'll look at each other and they can identify visually without having to do any kind of social thing. They'll recognize each other as oppressed by how they appear. If you're in the closet and you're queer, you don't have that kind of, well, you look oppressed. And, I hate to phrase it like that, but just like if you have something that is a symbol of oppression by virtue of how the state operates, queer people, in order for them to look oppressed, they have to perform that way consciously. So that is the choice component there.
But also sacrificing all of that advantage you were born with to be a woman.
Yeah, absolutely. And that you're highlighting something important, which is woman isn't just something that you're born as, like in terms of biology or in terms of how you feel, but also how you perform and how you identify. And performance could be like a drag queen. Drag queens are historically cis-het men, whereas in terms of identifying, regardless if it's through a performance like that or not, gender is performative vis-a-vis Judith Butler, but the idea that you identify around the fact that you're trans, the idea that in order for us to exist as trans women, for instance, we have to die on that hill. Basically, we have to plant that flag in the ground. That's why those flags exist. The trans flag, the non-binary flag, the ace flag, any kind of flag that you could think of under the rainbow. It's something that we have to create. It's not our skin color. It's something that we create in the material world. It's a social statement through something material that we fashion as political.
Nobody loves volleyball enough to do that, to just play a sport. Nobody wants to get into women's bathrooms enough to do that.
Like the idea that I would just do that arbitrarily for one simple reason. I do it because I feel comfortable being who I am. I think, therefore I am Descartes, even though Descartes was a horrible person, the Cartesian model, thinking beings, extended beings, that kind of thing. He was awful. But the idea that trans people, we exist by virtue of thinking and performing and behaving in ways that make us feel most comfortable. And the paradox is, well, don't you feel uncomfortable because the state will attack you? Well, again, if you've ever been in the closet, or if you know someone who has, it's like dying. It's like being trapped in a coffin. It feels false, and it creates a tremendous amount of anxiety. And there are some things that, as Kevin Costner said in Open Rage, there are some things that eat at a man worse than dying. Same is true with women. You want to be true to yourself. You want to feel genuine. And oftentimes, the feelings of falsehood that I experienced were by virtue of the fact that my father abused me. And any man that I knew in my life abused me in some shape or form. I was abused as a child. I was beaten. And there were sexual overtones to a lot of that. And I knew a lot of other people that were abused as well. And I just didn't trust men. I didn't want to be a man, even if I could have just opted to stay in the closet. It wasn't something that I was comfortable doing, but it also took me a long time to escape the closet. I didn't come out as trans until I was 36. Openly, I was identifying as a femboy before that, but it was just between me and my partner during COVID. But then after I left my partner, shortly after, like within 6 months of leaving them, suddenly I was like, okay, after dating someone else, leaving Florida, that person told me, hey, you can be a woman if you want. And I was like, yeah, I guess so, because they were a trans mask non-binary person, and they would kind of oscillate and jump back and forth. But if they could do it, why not I? So I was like, fuck it, and I did. But that kind of thing wasn't because I loved any particular thing, and I'm trying to gain access to women's spaces. Like, the idea that I would need to do that, or I'm doing it just to get one particular thing. It's like, no, I'm doing it because I feel comfortable existing that way, and I feel more myself, a found family. But I've often been accused, being a pornographic historian, a pornographer, a sex worker. I've been accused by many people, oh, well, you just want to get laid. Well, there is a kernel of truth insofar as if I'm being myself and I'm comfortable just being me, and I put my best self forward, and people feel like I'm not acting in bad faith, yeah, people are going to open up around me, so to speak. And it is a situation where, okay, if I'm being myself, I'm not lying to anyone, and people tend to like me for being, the trans woman puppy girl who likes sex marathons. Like, yeah, that's me. Guilty is charged, but I didn't do that as some kind of strategy to succeed where I was failing as a cis-het man. I was never cis-het. I was in the closet most of my life, and I came out, and then I found a great deal of success making friends, sexual or otherwise. Some of my best friends are platonic, AFAB or otherwise. I have people, regardless of their biology, male, female, or intersex. Don't have a lot of cis friends, I'm going to be honest, because cis people tend to be weird, and we have to have these really stupid conversations. These conversations, I'm like, don't you get it? And it's like, no, a lot of times I don't, and then I have to try and make them understand, and I feel like my back's to the wall, and I'm like, oh, I have to make them understand. And in reality, I prefer just talking with other trans people, because I don't have to have a lot of these conversations. But allies are important, because allies have more privilege than we do.
The only logical conclusion of why someone would be willing to sacrifice so much, give up the advantages that come with being a biological male forever. This is not putting on a skirt because you like the fashion, cosplaying a woman, and then taking the advantage back when it suits you. This is giving it up.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. What I said before about trans emasculation, the moment you do it, you're fucked. Because you'll never, you can't put the genie back in the lamp. Basically, it is Pandora's box. As soon as it's out and people know that you're gay, they'll never let you forget it. And when it comes time to remind people of that under fascism, you'll have paid the price. People will always, even if you live in like a liberal sphere, people will be like, oh, hey, remember that time? Oh, they're just a little bit different. Wink, wink.
The only reason someone would do that is because in their core, they know I am a woman.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it was like for me. I was like, well, I'm coming out. What's the term that best describes me? I've tried some different things. Does femboy really work? How do I feel? Like, well, I feel girly. I'm a girl. And that's it. That's the only reason I did it. I literally arbitrarily picked woman because it's the term that best described me according to how I felt, despite the fact that I knew that it would be a death sentence. Ultimately, if things get worse, I will have to stand by that. And I did that at the time, knowing that it would be a great risk. I had an ex that I dated in grad school, the non-binary person, someone who was involved in gender non-conforming politics for a long time. They went back into the closet. They sold out. And they told me, don't come out. This is incredibly dangerous. And they were someone who had to deal with TERFs in Great Britain. And they saw the resurgence of the fascist side of feminism rearing its ugly head. And they told me, don't come out of the closet. I was like, no, I'm going to come out. And I'm going to put my fucking name on it, too. Vanderwaard Art. It's a very uncommon name in America. It's Dutch. So, outside of various places where Dutch immigrants congregated in the United States, it's an uncommon name, so I put my name on it. And I'm like, well, okay, that's over. That's done with. I can't unring that bell. I wouldn't want to. It's attached to my life's work at this point. It's literally my brand. And I did that because I felt comfortable doing it. And I'd rather do that than go back in the closet. Because going back in the closet entails that I would have to betray my friends. Most of my friends are people, even when I was younger, in my 20s, most of my friends were either autistic or queer in some shape or form. And if I went into the closet, I would have to punch down at them when the chickens come home to roost. And I wasn't prepared to do that. I didn't want to be like my father or my stepfather or other abusive men that I'd known in my life. So I decided that I didn't want to be that anymore. But I don't want it.
And it's not about empathizing with women. It's I choose to live your shared experiences.
Yeah, like a pedagogy of the oppressed. We're going to share similar experiences differently, or we're going to experience similar degrees of oppression differently. The outcome is still oppression.
Putting myself often in more risk because trans women are much more likely to experience physical and sexual violence even than biologically cis women are.
And the cis women are often the perpetrators of that violence. Cis women will punch down harder against trans women to say, oh, well, we're the real women. We have the oppression. You're the imposter.
That's the only reason someone would go through this.
No, I do think that there are other reasons that people do it. I know the argument that you're making, just in terms of good faith examples, like the idea though that, I'm just going to agree with you for the most part, just because like the idea that, well, maybe there are people who are trans in bad faith. I don't like to make that argument, even though I think there are probably some people who are predatory, who perhaps lean into something, but we don't want to look at trans people or just gender non-conforming people and say, you're not a trans person in good faith. Like, the moment you start doing that, you start second-guessing everyone, and instead, we just need to acknowledge, okay, well, you're trans, you're gender non-conforming, and if you're a bad actor, it's because you're a bad actor. It's not because you're false as a trans person, it's because you're a traitor. That's how I would view something like that. That being said, I guess what I meant to say is that gender non-conforming people can still betray. Pete Buttigieg, for instance, is, pardon the expression, just a faggot. Someone who is, and this expression comes from a Tumblr post, Pete Buttigieg is just a faggot. When they betrayed some of us, they betrayed all of us. And specifically, this is referring to the AIDS crisis. And so when Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan left homosexual men to die, first and foremost, they're betraying all queer people. They betrayed the most privileged member of that group, which is a homosexual white man, first and foremost, but they're betraying everyone else too. And Pete Buttigieg might seem like, oh, he's so fancy, but at the end of the day, it's like we're all just fags in the eyes of the state. And you might have some people, like you have the LGBT alliance and certain forms of tokenism or betrayal that occur through that. And these people, it's not so much that they join these communities to infiltrate them, though, like with the Black Panthers being infiltrated by people of color through the FBI, that would then help dismantle these organizations. Like, that kind of thing can happen, but I would argue it's more of a Judas refrain. Like, if you have people do betray, but they're traitors. And it's not that they became queer and in bad faith, but that they were queer and then they betrayed the interests of their own groups to punch down, to move up. Like, that kind of thing does happen.
That's powerful. I was born a woman. I love being a woman. If I had been born a man, I don't know that I would have had the courage to do that, even if I wanted to live as a woman.
Yeah, I guess, there are plenty of people that don't want to come out, and that are on the fence as far as that goes, because on one hand, it is a question of self-preservation. If I come out, I'm being true to myself, but I'm putting myself at risk. But also, incidentally, silence is genocide. We're going to have to come out sooner or later, or they will kill all of us. So for me, I did it before things started. It was really on the cusp of, I came out in 2022, August 7th, 2022. And I had already, been living as a queer person for years before that. Basically since 2018, I was really starting to, I left home, I was studying overseas, and I met a gender nonconforming person, and I really, very quickly, over a process of months, began to realize just how queer I was, how quickly I started to learn. And I had someone, even if they went into the closet, they betrayed the cause, ultimately, I was someone who learned from them. I took what they taught me, the good and the bad, and I met future partners. The partners I met taught me further things about myself. Some of them abused me. And then eventually I started meeting partners who wouldn't abuse me, but would continue to help radicalize me until I'm at a position now where I am. But I was basically, especially from like 2019, 2020, in the middle of COVID, I was, basically out at that point. I just didn't know it yet. And I was fighting for particular causes. I hadn't said, I'm out, I'm loud, and I'm proud, but I was basically sacrificing my work in terms of the privilege that I would have normally by just towing the line. I stopped doing that in 2020. This was after Gamergate. This was basically at the start of, the end of Trump's presidency into Biden's, and I was already starting to move out. But as I did, I experienced various things that, it happened slower than you might think, but also quicker, suddenly, slowly, and then all at once. And it seems slow, but it was happening actually relatively quickly, because at that point, I was in my mid-30s. And over the process of, say, from 2020 to the present, 25, I was basically 31, from 31 to, sorry, I'm bad at math. I'm 39 now. So in 2020, I was, subtract 5 from 39, I was 34. So from 34 to 36, in the process of about 2 years, I went from being like, okay, I'm not really feeling like I belong in the closet, to, okay, I'm out. Coming, and that, 2 years might seem like a long time. And there was a moment before that, I was even more in the closet. So it was like peeling the layers to an onion. Now, people describe it as cracking an egg. I would describe it more like peeling the layers to an onion. People don't want to be, no one says, I'm an onion. People say, oh, you're an egg. That's how people view it. But it doesn't, eggs don't have concentric layers. Generally, you have one layer. But in my case, I was so deep in the closet that I had to crack multiple eggs, I guess. That's one way you could do it. It was a Russian doll kind of thing. That was my experience. But so it wasn't like, okay, it was this leap of faith that just happened immediately. By the time I reached that point where I was ready to come out, I was already basically out, and I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do it. And I had been with people who were encouraging me. I wasn't around my family who could abuse me. I was with people who supported me. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess, shit, I'll do that. So it wasn't just this thing where it's like one single moment where I have one defining moment of courage. It was many moments over a longer period of time until finally one day I was like, okay, yeah, I'm a trans woman now. I'm going to tell everyone.
If anything, trans women who have chosen to be part of our shared experience are maybe our greatest allies.
Okay, I mean, yeah, if that's how you feel about it, that's how you feel. We are more marginalized because we're not cis, and we're going to be treated as false differently by different groups depending on where we are. So, okay, yeah, sure, I'll take it.
Because it's people who saw who we are and what we experience and gave up everything they were born with to be here.
Yeah, in my case, like, I learned from my mom. My mom is a rape victim generationally, like, just insofar as what I mean by that is, trauma is generational, but my mom was raped, from a very young age into adulthood so many times that they can't remember it. And a lot of the experiences that I gleaned were through them telling me about them being homeless, them being abused when they were younger, them being abused by their husbands. People forget that women are abused first and foremost by their husbands, by someone in a position of authority. And I saw that, and I identified more with the oppressed than I did with the potential oppressor role that I could have as a man. I didn't even want to be a protector. I didn't want to be a white knight. I wanted to be a woman. Also, I will say that I played Metroid growing up. Samus Aran inspired me. Ellen Ripley, even though she's a problematic character, is someone that, that was my starting point. I identified with those characters initially. Laurie Strode from Halloween, Sarah Connor from the Terminator series. That was my starting point, and then I went from there. And then when I was in high school, I wrote, science fiction and fantasy stories about witches that were the protectors of the world. And they were the protectors of the world from abusive men, but also abusive women. And this was something that even in my, from the time, basically from 19 onwards, I was writing characters like that much more consciously. And I would write stories about characters that mirrored not just my experience, but my mother's experience. And I saw that, and I gave up whatever privilege I could have. I didn't feel privileged. I felt false identifying as a man. So I stopped.
Trans women are not the threat.
Preach.
Patriarchy is.
Yes. I would say patriarchy, man box, tokenism. Because when women tokenize, when cis women tokenize in particular, just anyone really, patriarchy for women is why they tokenize. They tokenize to act like a man against other people, women included. When J.K. Rowling is being a transphobic TERF, it's because patriarchy is the model for which they're upholding. It's important to recognize, absolutely.
And the attack.
I would also argue that capital more broadly, it's not just like patriarchy, it's literally the state model. Like, what is patriarchal? It's not just the patriarchy, but it's the state is patriarchal. Capitalism is patriarchal. So we can't just go after the patriarchy as this broad, nebulous thing. We have to go at it through material conditions that we change through social constructs, the base and the superstructure. We can't just be like, patriarchy bad. It's like, all right, well, how does it manifest, and how can we combat that, including token actors?
Back on trans women in particular, right? Because there's a big focus on trans women over trans men.
Trans women, again, are viewed as, men in dresses. Trans men are viewed as confused. They're viewed as salvageable by comparison.
Not to say that all trans people aren't under attack, because they are.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all going to be forced to go into the closet or die.
But attacking the rights of trans women is the pathway to attack all women. Now, why is that? It's because of what fundamentalism believes. Now, fundamentalism and republicanism are the same thing now. Christian fundamentalism...
Not just republicanism, also liberalism. You know, Republicans and liberals are two sides of the same liberal institution. You know, Democrats, Republicans, Western liberalism decays into fascism. Those are two sides of the same coin. And there has always been a Christian character, a Protestant ethic, vis-a-vis Mark Weber, to the American approach to capital. That's just the reality of capitalism more broadly. There has always been a Protestant character. It's also why you see so many presidents. Most of them aren't Catholic. There's only two in history from what I remember. Correct me if I'm wrong. Joe Biden and John F. Kennedy.
Fundamentalism is now a political party.
It's always been a political thing. It's not like this just happened recently. You know, America has always been Christian, divine right, manifest destiny, settler colonialism. You could look at the founding fathers and say they were secular. Well, so was Theodore Herzl in the state of Israel. The dogma isn't for the ruling class; it's for us.
And the reason that they are so obsessed with genitalia is that they believe that everything about you, your work, your purpose, and your role in this world is determined by your genitalia.
Yes, the idea that there is a biological function inherent to the Protestant ethic, and that is upheld through reactionary politics and moderate. Again, Republicans and Democrats. Democrats will defeat Republicans in the free marketplace of ideas, but similar to the white moderate versus people of color during the civil rights period, they won't take any material steps towards changing that. Remember what I said about my partner in Florida? And hey, Joe Biden could enshrine our rights within the Constitution if he really wanted to make a difference. He didn't, because it gives them the power to give and take through the veto process versus an amendment. Instead of trying to do anything demonstrable with establishment power exists to pit people against each other, so they deliberately go out of their way to posture as friends to pay lip service, but when push comes to shove, they are no different functionally than their Republican counterparts, who are much more openly fervent. You know, it's Malcolm X's foxes and wolves argument, and that can be applied to the rights, the rights of racial minorities, the rights of, you know, cis women, the rights of gender nonconforming people, and the rights of different religious minorities.
The second you are born, let me explain.
Also, I don't want to interrupt them too much here just because they're coming from a religious background. I had a Methodist church right next to me, but by and large, I've been an atheist/Satanist since as long as I could remember. Since I was a little girl, I've been a Satanist. So I'm kind of unusual, but I'll let them explain this from their perspective.
From the time you're born into fundamentalism, you learn that acceptance depends on obedience. And the genitalia you're born with in Christian fundamentalism determines who you'll be attracted to, how you dress, what your role in society is, what your role in the home is, the God you serve, who you'll vote for.
The nuclear model. The nuclear model under Rome wasn't Christian, it was pagan, but it evolved into something Christian, into the Protestant ethic that I've been talking about.
What you look like, how you dress. They don't teach you how to think, they teach you what to think. And consent plays no role in this, especially for women.
Yeah, it's dogma. Well, ideally, yeah, with woman as others, Simone de Beauvoir, men ostensibly have some degree of agency, but at the end of the day, like, they're allowed to dress up in drag, for instance, but they still have to toe the line, and they still have to hyper-perform as men. You see that with, like, Matt Walsh or Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, people like that. These hyper-masculine men are infantilized and turned into these abusers by the system itself. So consent is dubious even with them.
This is the underpin of modesty and purity culture at all ages. Fundamentalists would rather cover up babies for their safety than demand that men stop touching babies.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, incidentally, when I say the Protestant ethic, another name for that is the Puritan ethic. The Puritan ethic is more applicable to America specifically because the Puritans left England to colonize America. The Pilgrims were Puritans. So the Protestant ethic more broadly applies to capitalism around the world, whereas the Puritan ethic is basically here in America.
They are citadels of protecting sex offenders because the belief is that the female genitalia is for the use of men and the promoting of his genetic line.
Yeah, absolutely. In the medieval period, you had something called black penitents, basically people who were criminals who were afforded positions of privilege or protection within the church without really becoming monks per se, or they became a monk, but they were a monk who's essentially a criminal fugitive historically. Through the patriarchal mode of the church under Christendom, those were men who were, amongst other things, rapists and murderers. And they would rather protect that image of man through the black penitent and basically covering them up. You know, it's similar to Jeffrey Epstein, similar to other sex pests. This is nothing new. And similar to Catholic priests, they would rather protect those men and the image of man through patriarchal thought under capital than protect women and children, because women and children don't exist under the state to be protected by the state. They exist to be exploited.
Their stringent view of God can't handle any mobility or flexibility or change.
I guess, sorry, I said I wouldn't interrupt, but I do want to say that it's not just, this is a particular radical sect of capitalism more broadly, but the reality is that this inflexibility, whether it's religious or secular, is inflexible regarding anything that deviates away from the status quo. Because moderates might seem more flexible than reactionaries, but they're actually just as rigid, if not more so. The enemy of progress in America, said Martin Luther King, isn't the mask-off reactionary, it's the white moderate. Same idea with second-wave feminists versus equal rights for trans people. The greatest enemy for progress, I wish I could say it's cis-het men, but you know who it is? It's sellout queer people and sellout feminists.
The trans identity threatens the entire structure that holds up the church, because the entire,
not just the church, but capital.
Church is founded on white male patriarchy.
But not just white male patriarchy, you know, token groups within that. Though tokenizing forces will serve white men first and foremost, absolutely. There's always a man in charge, basically. There are no female presidents. There are no female popes.
And the subservience of women. Without those strict, narrow gender roles, it collapses. It completely and utterly fails. And trans identity in particular threatens this system. Women are told to save themselves. Women are burdened with all sexual sin. So
original sin.
You have to cover up, and you can't have sex, and you can't do this.
Well, virgin whore syndrome, women are expected to cover up and they can have sex, but then men get bored with their wives, they put them on a pedestal, a Madonna, and then they go out and they chase the whore. And that can be literally having a mistress, but also in stories, who's the most interesting female character, classically? It's the whore. It's the Gorgon. It's the Medusa. You know, it's the alien queen from Aliens. It's the xenomorph is more interesting than Lambert in Alien, Veronica Cartwright's character. You know, it's the wallflower is just from a standard, dogmatic point of view, is treated as boring. And, you know, so there's this virgin whore paradox where the maiden is both a virgin and a whore, because even though she's told to cover up, she'll be expected to sexually provide for her husband. And even though men will say, oh, well, anything outside of reproductive sex is gay or whatever, they'll also expect women to be sluts.
But also, if it does happen to you consensually or not, it's your fault.
Yep, absolutely. Blame the whore. Blame the wife.
For evangelical men, it's all about what's under there. Can I sleep with it? Can it make babies? I don't want you in the public sphere. I need you at home. God says I'm in charge, and I say get your in the kitchen.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. The narcissistic Eve, Paradise Lost, where Eve is looking at her own reflection. She's like, God's like, okay, you have to go and be with Adam. And she's like, no, I don't want to be with Adam. Who's this who's this handsome devil? And she's literally looking at her own reflection. And Milton has a lot of problems, but the idea that he's highlighting is just as much. There's certainly a sexist critique to be made of that story, Paradise Lost, but also that God's like, okay, we have to send the angel Gabriel, I think, to take Eve by the hand to go and be with Adam. It's literally God's decree, God's law.
And it threatens their ideals of fundamentalist parenting. Parenting and fundamentalism is not about expression or learning how to be a free thinker. It's about falling in line.
Also, sorry I keep stressing this, but it ties to capital. It ties to a Puritan ethic of capital. It's not that they're not just a church in a feudalistic sense, but they exist within capital. It is embedded within that. You can't separate the two, which is why I say it's not just patriarchy, it's patriarchal capitalism. Big difference.
They call it like breaking a child's will or train a child up. And trans people in particular threaten this ideal that if I tell my kid that they have to follow this regimen, they're going to stay with it their whole lives. That's why they consider universities to be propaganda hubs. Because
Yes, it's an opportunity to break away from the nuclear model. You're taught at home to stay in the home, to uphold the home. And when I went to uni, classically, I went partly to get an education, to expand my mind, just to open up my mind. But also, my grandmother said, when I went to college, I went to find a husband. So I thought, okay, what if I could find someone who was interested in me, but also someone I was interested in? And I found the people I was interested in, androgynous people, gender nonconforming people, neurodivergent people, tended to be at university. Because if you're not happy at home, you'll take steps, however difficult, to find your way to places where you feel like you belong, where you feel like you can learn, where you feel like you have access to sexual spaces where you can express yourself and be with other people who are expressing themselves. So yeah, there is a kernel of truth to universities being propaganda hubs, what Jordan Peterson calls postmodern neo-Marxists, because when I went to college, I arrived at Manchester Metropolitan University and I started sleeping with my flatmate right away because we were both from America. We were both away from home. And there was this situation where I didn't have any blankets. My room wasn't furnished. And the city center was 30 minutes away walking. I didn't have a car. And I would have to go and buy all of these things later. But I first had to exchange the money that I had, the American money that I had, which had to last me a month before I had access to my school funding, my grant, or my loan. Actually, it wasn't even a grant. There was a little bit of a grant, maybe part of that, and what ended up happening, though, just logistically living overseas, living away from your family, not having any friends, it was scary. I got homesick, and I was crying on the phone to my mom and saying, I don't have any blankets. And they're like, well, go and ask the nice French girl down the hallway if you could borrow a blanket or a pillow or something. And they, so I did that. But then the person I ended up dating overheard me asking said French girl for blankets. And I was crying and just upset and stuff. And they said to me, this other person approached me, the non-binary person that I dated for about 2 years, approached me during the inauguration where the dean was basically addressing the students in the student center and said to me, hey, I have blankets. And, one thing led to another, but we started sleeping together. But that was propaganda. It wasn't just, I was being taught from the professors, but also other students. If you want to learn something, sleep with someone who's smart, sleep with a grad student. They'll teach you things. They're not just going to teach you about their body and how to please them. Ideally, if you're having sex with someone, you want to communicate, but they're also going to teach you about who they are, what they're about, why they're there. And this person taught me a lot about gender studies. I basically got a lifetime's worth of education from this person, even though they abused me, even though they did all of these awful things to me later on. They eloped, they left me for someone else, despite the fact that they were poly, and then they said that they weren't, and then they married this person in secret, and so on and so forth. They taught me a lot, so that idea of the propaganda hub It's not just the institution, but the people who go there. And there is a kernel of truth there. Absolutely.
It teaches kids how to think freely.
Yes. All of my partners, even the abusive ones, taught me things that contributed to what I decided I would use to think freely. In abusive, fundamentalist situations, this Mater is absolutely correct. They don't want people thinking for themselves. They want people to think dogmatically, using fundamentalist teachings, scripture.
It breaks the dogma. It breaks the propaganda. They lose male-dominated patriarchal control.
Sure. But also, incidentally, the tokenized element, I will die on this hill. It's just, yes, it's male dominated, it's patriarchal, but we can't just say, oh, it's men, it's penis havers of a patriarchal sort. It's like, no, women play a role in fascism too.
The end game for fundamentalism is white male dominion.
Yes, basically. But even in those circumstances, women will still be expected to punch down. Just because a woman is in a household and she's a parent doesn't mean that she can't abuse her children and enforce them to adhere to this dogma. It's not just men. Women in these situations will teach their children to be abusive half of the time. It really depends. Jehovah's Witnesses, mothers in those situations will be expected to teach their children. Just because they're in the household and they're not in a paid position doesn't mean that they don't have an expected role as educators.
And let's talk about how all this anti-trans conversation is already affecting women, because when you open the floodgates to hate trans women, that gun is pointed directly at all women.
Yeah, absolutely. The moment we start policing ourselves, people are going to be like, are you woman enough? Do you meet this standard? The standard is impossible. It is both specific and vague. It is something that is impossible to uphold and impossible to escape unless we fight back openly. Again, silence is genocide. We have to speak out. We have to fight back. That's what trans people are doing just by existing. We just want to exist, okay? We don't want to get policed by anyone, male or female. But it happens, and it happens by a large variety of groups. But those people policing us are policing themselves, because what they're doing is they're effectively attacking other women. The moment you sell out, you pay for doing so with your integrity, Silvia Federici, by taking Judas pay. Absolutely. It sows discontent among the oppressed in ways that we will be mistrustful of. Trans people are mistrustful of cis women because cis women historically punch down. That's just the reality. This isn't just like some new thing. This has been going on ever since the suffragettes. The idea of the what is it? Not the gender critical, but the not the non-binary flag, genderqueer. The genderqueer flag was designed by Marilyn Roxy to basically take the color scheme of the women suffragettes of Great Britain and turn that into a gender non-conforming flag. But then the TERF movement took the same colors and basically took them back. They colonized it again, because the British suffragettes were sexist, were fascist feminists, literally, in Great Britain. And Marilyn Roxy took this genderqueer flag and used that color scheme to try and make something to fight that. And then what ended up happening is TERFs took the same color scheme and that flag and used it to basically colonize trans people. So TERFs don't serve women, they serve capital. And they do that by punching down against other women, specifically trans women. Absolutely.
The Bible doesn't say anything against trans people, but let's see how this violence plays out towards women. In the NCAA, there are 10 trans athletes out of 520,000 athletes.
Wow. Sounds about right. I mean, even just among the American population, we make up less than 0.01%. Or it's 0.1% something like that. It's a very small number. Basically, you have 350,000 people in America and 350 million people in America and 1.4 million people who, as of 2020, 2022, thereabouts, who identified as trans, probably less now just because they're being bullied into the closet. So that's less than 1%. That's a fraction of a percent. So a similar number with athletes, where you have 10 athletes out of 520,000, something like that. Yeah, that sounds about right.
But Republicans have made over 700 bills in the last year alone against trans people.
It's not just Republicans, though, because, again, liberals don't challenge these things meaningfully in any kind of way. So, you can't just say, oh, it's Republicans, oh, it's the patriarchy. It's like, no, there are Democrats, male or female, white or non-white, who have basically refused to challenge these things in such a way so that we are where we are by virtue of the fact that establishment politics serves establishment aims, regardless of who you are within it. Yes, it's patriarchal, but it's within capital in ways that American liberalism, so-called equality, you and I both know that the Constitution does not treat people equally. Like, certain people have rights, certain people don't. Those with less rights will punch down against those with even less rights. And that includes people who have tokenized. Generally, oh, the Democrats are more progressive, right? No, it's just tokenism is tokenism. And so it's not just the bills that are being proposed by Republicans. You have people who are trying to meet them in the middle with that shit. And those people are Democrats. Those people are cis women. Sorry.
Texas is proposing that being trans is a felony.
Making queerness illegal, quite literally. Yes.
Think about what happens when the law tells you you can only express your gender this way.
Yeah, it will affect trans people will bear the brunt of that initially, but this will be bad for everyone. Trans or otherwise. Cis women will basically be like, okay, you can act like this. Anything outside of that is trans. If you act like that, you committed a felony. Hello, witch hunts?
This photo of Angel Reese was published on Twitter 2 days ago, claiming she has a mustache. It was edited to give her that mustache. She doesn't have one. But why?
Even if she did, it wouldn't matter.
I engage in this. Well, 1, she's black. 2, she's really tall, she's really athletic, and she's not doing what a pretty woman is supposed to be doing. She is a fully employed professional athlete.
Sure. Well, and it also bears in mind, too, that a lot of athletes in these positions will punch down. Like, you have basically non-trans athletes that will punch down against trans athletes. Like, this is something that you see in boxing, for instance. You have different athletes who will basically be like, okay, men and women shouldn't be fighting each other, and trans athletes, oh, if a trans athlete fights a woman, then her fragile skull will just break like an egg. Even though you have male athletes with CTE and broken bones, orbital or otherwise, that happens all the time. But, men make this argument, someone like Joe Rogan, but you also have women who will make this argument too. It's not just men.
In both Utah and Florida, teen high school athletes have had to leave their schools after being accused of being trans because they looked masculine, or they were muscular, or they wore baggy clothes.
And oftentimes you have limited scholarships, for instance, and you have, trans athletes. There was one case of trans athletes of color, and there was this white girl who was competing for the same scholarship. One of the trans athletes of color, they were siblings, beat this white girl, and this white girl said, oh, well, they're trans. And they were punching down at them by virtue of that. So again, women are made to fight against each other to divide and conquer themselves, but that happens along racial lines. It happens against cultural, gendered lines. It happens along religious lines. There's along class lines, and it's important to acknowledge it's not just men doing this. And we need to really highlight that women will police and divide and conquer themselves according to these different values, where someone such as yourself, a white cis-het woman, has more privilege than a trans person, at least according to your gender. because, it's something within sports. Cis athletes can point the finger, a cis female athlete can point the finger at a trans athlete and say, you don't belong. And that's something that's happened all over the sports world. It's happened in fucking chess, for Christ's sake. Oh, trans people can't play chess. We can't do anything. Genocide is genocide. And women, cis women, play a part in that.
When trans women are targeted, any woman who does not fit the traditional gender role of women or who does not tailor her appearance to the male gaze will be accused of being trans, will experience persecution, and will have those rights stripped away. The Republican...
Yes. Yeah, the idea that the moment you start attacking trans people, you'll start attacking anyone who appears trans, anyone who's obscene, anyone who's degenerate. The problem with these terms is that it's selective punishment in such a way that is made through broad language, the broadest possible language. It's the prohibition of existence itself. And this will affect all aspects of life. In Texas, for instance, they have a law, free speech versus basically the right to police language that's deemed obscure in ways that skirt around the Miller test. In such a way, they're trying to protect women and children, which is in reality that is just capital doing what capital does, giving people rights, taking those rights away. People need to remember that when America was formed, the Bill of Rights was not something that they wanted to give. The ruling class did not want to give working people, specifically working men, the Bill of Rights. And after that, people had to fight like hell to get rights for them and theirs, but generally that had a tokenized component to it. And those tokenized elements are going to go away first. The peeling of the onion, right? Those on the outside or closer to the outside are going to feel the heat of fascism more quickly than those closer to the center.
Conservative fundamentalist movement has been very clear that they want to reverse no-fault divorce. They don't want women to vote. They want white women in the home, not women.
And this isn't just the fault of fundamentalists, though. This is the fault of people who work hand in hand with fundamentalists. Like, Obama and Trump are friends, and various other people within establishment politics. They exist within a system. If you are gaslit, gate-capped girl boss, for instance, then you have to do what it takes to get into Olympus, and then the moment you do, you punch down against people who are outside of that, outside of Valhalla, outside of Camelot. Doesn't matter. The city of Omelas will always have an Omelas child, an Omelas refrain, and those within establishment politics, regardless of their sex, their gender, their ethnicity, their religion, will adhere to that model, and that model does nobody good but the elite. And in the end, it won't do them any good because climate change is happening and they'll all die too. So it's a death cult. Capitalism is a very brutal system, and it's not just the fundamentalist Christians. I know that's why Mader's talking about this. That's the position they come from, but it's also Democrats. It's also so-called progressives like Bernie Sanders, who refuse to talk about Palestine and refuse to call it a genocide, and various other people. J.K. Rowling, who says she cares about women's rights, when in reality she's a fascist. She's a billionaire.
Women of color, remember, it's white women they're targeting with that. Why? Why would they support these laws that are clearly so unjust? Because it fits in their paradigm of a woman's role based on the genitalia she was born with. A man should be voting for his wife. She shouldn't have an opinion. God has decided that he's in charge of the home and in charge of her.
And I realize it's very easy to just say, look, it's just the church. It's just fundamentalists. But again, and this is what this person went through. And I see that and I hear what they're saying. But I'm also like, yeah, okay, fine. But what about people who aren't married? What about people who aren't female? What about people who aren't white? What about, all of these other people who are going to be abused more often or differently than the person that she clearly is? So it's just something to keep in mind. What she's saying is important. And my best friend came from a fundamentalist Christian background from Texas, and they are someone who is very much in a situation where they were raised to be a child soldier, a soldier of God, and they had to walk away from that as a gender nonconforming person themselves. So it's very much a situation where we have to we have to, hear what they're saying. Be like, okay, it's not just the church. It's like, how did we get here? Why are these questions being asked? It's not just because, patriarchal men. It's not just Immortan Joe. It's Joe Biden. It's Obama. It's the establishment. It's various women in positions of power who sold out. It's the feminist movements of yore that really haven't gone anywhere. R.E. J.K. Rowling. It's a holistic problem, requires a holistic solution.
Divorce, she shouldn't be able to leave a man. Her body is his property.
But that extends to women seeing other people with less rights than them, or who are more oppressed than them. They'll treat them like property too. What do you think happens with trans women? We're often treated like the property of cis women. Happens. Trust me, lived through it.
It's also why many fundamentalists don't believe that domestic violence or marital rape are crimes. Because a woman, based on her genitalia and their perversion of the scripture, has decided that she is owned.
Sure, absolutely. It's a form of slavery, basically. It's the oldest form of slavery. The pimp and the whore, or the pimp and the whore, basically. A husband, a wife. But even before the institution of marriage as we know it, just the idea, the pimp is the world's oldest profession. The whore is the world's oldest profession, therefore the world's oldest form of labor exploitation. But as it evolves into capital, you're going to see discrepancies in terms of some people have more privilege within the dichotomy. And, white straight women, first and foremost, are going to be treated like virgin whore syndrome affects them in ways where they'll punch down against other people that they'll pimp. Whores policing whores. Basically, what I mean by that is we have to have the whores' revenge against profit. Whores have to stop policing each other, because some whores are treated differently than other whores. You're either a pimp or a whore. You're a worker or a worker for worker rights or states' rights. You're a cop or a victim. And we have to find a way to upend that while acknowledging that, whores do police each other, and they will, and they'll police them for the man, for the system. Women acting like men, Ellen Ripley.
We believe that at the end of this, however long this is, we are entering the age of woman. I truly believe that.
While we have to overcome adversity, there has to be struggle. I think, we're approaching this idea, a specter is rising in Europe. The specter of a specter is haunting Europe. Marx, Communist Manifesto, a specter of communism. By the time Marx wrote that, Mary Shelley had already written Frankenstein. This idea, the rise of this iconoclastic voice that spoke out against Cartesian abuse, against settler colonialism, against heteronormative arguments. Shelley was 19 when she wrote this book. She had no formal education. She was educated, just not, the way that, fascist women are. And this idea that capital, the moment it was born, it was dying. And there's this crossroads that we're at where we can choose a more enlightened path that leads to universal liberation and equal rights for all, or it can go down the road of fascism. Fascism and communism occupy the same space of decay. Right now the state is weak, and we can fight the state in ways where we can sway influence towards humanizing trans women, but also other marginalized groups, while also recognizing that, cis women can tokenize too. I'm not saying that Monte Mater is token, but they're also not mentioning that at all. They're just saying, oh, but it's just men. It's just the patriarchy. Women are a part of that. And that includes trans women too. Trans women can betray their own. I've had to deal with that too. It's very frustrating. I've had trans men, trans women, and non-binary people fuck me over. Absolutely. But there's also a lot less of us than there are cis women.
But the only way that we're going to do that, especially in the face of what's happening right now, is that we have to stand up as women right now, immediately and consistently, for all women.
Intersectional solidarity. But also, it's not just the age of women is a little dubious just because it's like, well, what about non-binary people? non-binary people aren't women. They're non-binary. What about intersex people? Women shouldn't be the rulers of the earth. It should be workers looking after each other. Intersectional solidarity means that it's not just the age of women. That's a very William Marsden approach to things, where he believed that women would rule the earth. And under basically Western liberalism and Wonder Woman, look how that turned out. So, no, it's not the age of women, it's the age of workers dismantling the state. That's what we need to do. We have to develop communism. Communists aren't just going to be women, because men, it's not just, women are going to rule over everyone, because that benevolent, liberal kind of matriarchal feminism kind of thing. It's like, well, no, it's intersectional gender studies more broadly, intersectional a polity of expression that allows for the oppressed to rule over themselves together under anarchistic models of governance that have nothing to do with the state. The state needs to be dismantled because the state exists to oppress workers. So I don't know. Just wanted to clarify that at the end here. It's not just the age of women, it's the age of workers versus the state.
Do not be blindsided by doctrine that says gender has to fit what a white male says.
Well, I'm careful. Again, white male, like I'm white and male. What you mean is a white cis-het man.
It has to fit. Any woman at risk is all of us at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a bigotry for one is a bigotry for all. So, yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. And that's basically my thoughts and feelings about this video by this person. Again, it's not a brand new video by any stretch. It was released March 18th, so 3 or 4 months ago, thereabouts. And it's like, all right. But what they're saying is important, but it's also, we need to understand struggle is something that has to be unified. Intersectional solidarity is the way forward. And I wanted to provide that by basically expanding their viewpoint beyond some of their language is a little bit narrow in ways that I don't find especially productive. But overall, I agree a lot with what they say. It's the idea with allies is we have to help them understand our point of view as oppressed people. That's how the pedagogy of the oppressed works, while also understanding that if they have oppression or if they are being coerced by state forces, we have to work with that as well. So it's not just we have to work together. Teamwork makes the dream work. So I woke up today, I had a little bit of time to say something about something other than an essay or something that I'm writing or illustrating. I just had a little bit of energy, and this just popped up in front of my feed, and I thought, okay, I'll respond to it. I don't always do React videos. I'm doing less of them because I do prefer to focus on written essays, interviews, and various forms of work that I do normally through my book series. I'll leave a link in the description in regards to that. But as far as what this person's saying, it's not perfect because, we have to see the struggle as the struggle for all workers, not just women, trans or otherwise. This is a united front. It's not just the age of women, but I think their heart is in the right place. And that's just something that I wanted to say, I wanted to talk about arbitrarily. I just had the free time, and it's, sure, why not? There's someone I've come across before, and I think, hey, why not? So yeah, this person, they seem okay. Again, I'm not super familiar with them. I subscribe to them, and I've had a couple of videos of them. They seem okay, and I welcome their viewpoint. It's important to bounce ideas off of each other from different positions of privilege and oppression. Absolutely. So, go and show them some love. But also, if you like what I do, like, share, and subscribe. I don't just do React videos. I also do essays. I work with sex workers predominantly, gender nonconforming, ethnic minorities, religious minorities, disabled people, neurodivergent people, unpaid labor to varying degrees of oppression is largely what I do. And if you like that kind of thing and you want to support it, the details for that will also be in the description of this video. Otherwise, you could leave a comment if there's something you'd like to bring to my attention. please do, and I'll take a look at it. And who knows? Maybe I'll make a video, maybe I'll write an essay. It really depends. But otherwise, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching this little trans woman's YouTube channel, as small as it is. It means a lot. And if there's anything you like about the content I do, feel free to share it. Share it amongst your friends. You know, raising awareness is a group struggle, and I need your help to help make my ideas and my work public as much as I can. Silence is genocide. All that being said, thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe out there.